Good morning and welcome to today's CEDA live stream, The Hybrid Workforce, Enabling Participation for Intergenerational Australians. I'm Clint O'Brien, an Associate Director at CEDA. Before we go any further today, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on Aboriginal land. Wherever you're joining us from for today's national live stream, you too are on Aboriginal land. Here in Brisbane, that's the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders present and emerging. For those of you who know CEDA well, you'll know that providing leading analysis and bringing new ideas that enable workforce participation have been themes that we have researched, made recommendations on, and convened discussion on for many years. Just recently, our Chief Executive, Melinda Salento, participated in the National Skills Summit in Canberra, and last week, we discussed some of the big issues affecting our future workforce at our State of the Nation conference in Canberra. We know that economic and societal shifts change workforce behaviours. Right now, Australia is experiencing shortages across the labour market, while the Great Resignation plays out, and organisations and entire sectors are battling for talent and searching for expertise to increase productivity, and they're working on strategies to deliver on talent. Gig executives are delivering on expertise, skills, and know-how. How we amplify the benefits of participating in the workforce for longer and in new ways can help address talent shortages and deliver improved outcomes in the labour market and for those exploring how to work differently. Today, we convene to discuss how to unlock the potential of older Australians, how to optimise workforce participation, and the role of the gig executive, leadership, and how we do it well. Today, I'd like to thank all of our participants and speakers who will be introduced shortly: Dr. Sean Gallagher, Dr. Kelly Windle, Kate Roffey, and David Colliver. I'd like to invite the viewers today to participate in the discussion on Twitter using CEDA's handle @CEDA_news. And if you'd like to use the hashtag, it's #diverseworkforce. Our viewers today can also access Pigeonhole Live and submit your questions to our panel live on the screen by entering the box you'll find underneath the viewing window or by using the Pigeonhole app. To do that, surf to ceda.pigeonhole.at and use the password #diverseworkforce. You can enter your own questions there and vote on questions that others have put forward. Please also do take your time to rate today's live stream experience at the end of the session. I'd like to acknowledge the support and working with our sponsors for today, Future Leadership. It's been a pleasure working with them, and I'm now going to hand over to Adam Kirachow and invite him to make some opening comments and introduce our participants properly before getting into discussion. Adam, it's all yours.
Thank you, Clint, and a very warm welcome to everybody. In the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, wherever we may be joining from today, and their connections to land, sea and community. I'm standing on the land of the peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples today, noting that this land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. It is my great pleasure to welcome everyone to join today, the panel, to discuss this conversation, especially my rather rock-style lineup of panellists today, offering four very different perspectives on the new way of working and the hybrid working model. We have a leading academic in new ways of working, Dr. Sean Gallagher, Director for the Centre of New Workforce at Swinburne University of Technology. Alongside is Dr. Kelly Windle, psychologist and executive advisor, working with boards and teams on what leadership should look like in this new hybrid world. Bringing the CEO lens to the conversation is the trailblazing Kate Roffey, currently CEO of Melbourne Sports Centre, and with a track record of leading and shaping future-facing organisations. And finally, David Colliver, sharing the lived experience of having been a senior executive, gig executive, for many well-known organisations to discuss the reality of choosing to work differently. A warm welcome to all our panellists and to all of you listening across the nation. As we've heard at the recent Jobs and Skills Summit, there is certainly no shortage of opinions on the challenges and opportunities of our new hybrid working environment. But what there is a lack of practical examples and evidence-based solutions for a more inclusive and productive economy. Today, we'll have a robust discussion about the real-world challenges and opportunities facing us as a hybrid business community. Each panellist will open with perspectives and provocations from their diverse experiences, followed by 25 minutes of Q&A, in which we eagerly invite questions from the audience, as Clint mentioned. The notion of hybrid means different things to different people. On the one hand, hybrid workers enjoy flexibility, but may risk missing out on valuable relationship building or on-the-job learning and employment security. Hybrid workplaces might enjoy a lower footprint and greater attractiveness to potential employees, but risk a disintegrated culture. As expert Zach Dunn said recently in Forbes, it's really hard to get anybody to a party when all the RSVPs are saying maybe. Hybrid leaders are in the midst of discovering how to drive productivity via purpose, communicating remotely without overstepping the mark to remote control, channeling empathy through the various channels available, being Teams, Zoom, or other digital windows of opportunity, all while trying to figure out upskilling without knowing precisely what skills are needed for the future. Finally, we have the new macro possibilities of the hybrid workforce. I come to this conversation as partner of Gig Executive, a business that lends senior executives to organisations when and where they need them. Every day I question, do organisations really need to own all of their senior talent long term? And indeed, does senior talent today want or need to be owned? Data from Dr. Gallagher's research may suggest not, but more on that soon. In boosting our nation's productivity and creating an inclusive economy of full employment, might we find that the knowledge economy is quite compatible with the sharing economy, where skills are brought in and circulate through society on demand? I'd contend that this is already well underway. I'd like now to invite our first panellist, Dr. Sean Gallagher, for his remarks.
Great. Thanks, Adam, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here with you today. We've been engaged in research focusing on the hybrid working literally since the beginning of the pandemic, and we've continued to build up a deeper and more sophisticated understanding of what's happening across the economy. Today's session is really looking at the intergenerational dimension of that. And we released a report a couple of months ago, and what I like to say, one of my co-authors then was Natalie James. She was my co-author 2 months ago. She's now Secretary of the Federal Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. And why I make that point is that upon her appointment to that role, she made the point that flexible working is now a baseline expectation for all workers, but the Fair Work system is not fit for purpose. And I think that's a critical point in the sense that flexible working is increasingly expected and demanded. And I can give you the top line results of that research and then go a deep dive into what I see to the intergenerational challenges that we're facing. The top three results were that, first of all, Australian workers are exhausted. About a third are working more than they were before the pandemic. The second is there's a huge increase in the expectation of flexible working. 4 in 5 workers now expect flexible working, which is up from 3 in 5 only 6 months ago. And the number one reason, it's well-being. Workers see that flexible working enables better well-being and work-life balance outcomes. So even though we're here today to talk about flexible working and hybrid working, I think it's critical to make the point that that is not an end in itself. Flexible working and hybrid working is a means to an end. And for workers, that end is better well-being. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what I see as some of the challenges for the intergenerational participation with respect to the hybrid workforce. And excuse me for checking my notes. I just literally did the analysis an hour ago just to understand what was going on. And what I'm seeing based on this initial deep dive is that there's a generational divide emerging over hybrid working. And let me put it in very provocative terms, perhaps. I think that older generation workers in the hybrid working context are not respecting, valuing, or treating fairly younger generation workers in the way that they should. So let me give you some examples as to why. As I mentioned before, 1 in 3 workers across the country are doing more hours now. For younger generation workers, I'm talking Gen Zs and millennials, 1 in 2 are doing more hours now. They're working harder, yet 1 in 4 of those workers are not being paid overtime for the work that they're doing. The amount of overtime not being paid is far greater for the younger generation workers than older generation workers. Then in terms of we're not valuing our younger generation's workers in terms of that they actually represent the future. Mindful that millennials are the largest cohort of any worker, generation of worker in our current workforce. Yet I think we need to pay respect to their expectations for how they want to work. And it's quite clear, Gen Zs and millennials are much more likely to want to work flexibly. And we're seeing that in the data. They are, they're taking advantage of working flexibly. They are happy to take time off during the middle of the day and work at a time and a place that fits into their life in order to get not only the work done, but drive better work-life balance and well-being outcomes. And this is perhaps a little bit surprising to me. They value flexible working extraordinarily much. 4 in 5 Gen Zs are prepared to forego a pay rise in order to have flexibility. It's 3 in 4 for millennials. That's much, much higher than older generation workers. That's pretty extraordinary, particularly given that we're in a period of rising living costs. And, Gen Zs and millennials, they don't get paid much relative to the older generations. That's how much they desperately want to have flexible working options. And the last bit I want to talk about is that we need to make sure that we respect our younger generation workers. And I'm going to give you one example in terms of, we asked the question, what is your ideal workplace? Where would you like to, to spend, work? And interestingly, baby boomers, even though they say that they want to come back to the office, their biggest preference is they want to work from home. Yet, which generation has the highest preference for working in the workplace? It's Generation Z, the youngest generation. Now, this is a real challenge in terms of making sure that we afford younger generation workers the opportunity to learn from those that have the IP, the know-how, the experience of older that have been around in the workforce. How do we make sure that we are passing on to our younger generation workers that experience? And I think workplace learning is going to be a ticking time bomb. It's even more so for if you look at, say, millennial and looking at the gender divide. Millennial women, they almost want to spend, no time in the office. But how are they going to make sure that they also benefit from, this workplace learning? But I want to finish off by saying that millennials, as I mentioned, the largest cohort, by far and away, they have the strongest expectation for hybrid working. So I think that, coming back to this generational divide, that, the Gen Xers and the baby boomers need to pay much more respect, to treat fairly, and to value our younger generation workers in the way that they were when they started off in their career.
Fantastic. Dr. Sean Gallagher, thank you very much. Thought-provoking and probably going ahead of the trend that we're seeing at the moment, and some really important things to grapple with for us. Dr. Kelly Windle, over to you for your comments. Thank you.
Great, thanks Adam, and good day everyone. The primary question posed to this panel was, how do we optimise intergenerational workforce participation, productivity and wellness? Big question. My answer is by shifting our conversation from a focus on what work people are doing to a focus on what contributions people are making at work. Particularly in legacy industries, it can feel like turning the Titanic, trying to reorientate and upskill people in future technologies and behaviours. When we lay a lens over this of hybrid workplaces, great resignations, Industry 5.0, 5 generations coming together, all of the research just outlined, we're still only looking at the tip of the future of work iceberg. And the problem with this iceberg is, just like the 100-year-old Titanic, most talent management systems are not flexible or fast enough to turn. They are still built predominantly around structured permanent roles with narrow, slow career pathing and with an overwhelming focus on hiring and rewarding for what a business needs done versus what a business needs to become. Businesses can't afford to be Titanic cruise ships anymore. People don't want to board cruise ships. They want to be in those fun black Zodiacs that bounce around and get up close to all the cool stuff and then adapt quickly and move on to other exciting ways of adding value. And this holds especially true for older workers, but as we've just heard, it also holds very true for many others of all generations who are now prioritising lifestyle over job status and purpose-led impact over financial-led performance or benefit. So how do we create more Zodiacs and less Titanics in our talent management strategies? How do we enable people, especially older generations, to get in and out of cool gigs as rapidly as they or the business need without crashing into the inflexible talent management iceberg? Well, we evolve the conversation. When we shift from an orientation of what one does at work and we start to talk about how one contributes through their work, 3 things happen. First, participation, workforce participation just goes through the roof. When you outline what you're trying to achieve and you ask someone how they want to contribute to that, and they come up with their own answer, there is an implicit social promise created through that exchange. And this promise carries an internal motivation and a felt accountability that just isn't created when we simply tell someone this is what we need done and they agree to do it. And when we create space for people to also consider not only how they want to contribute, but what that could look like for them, we enable a level of creativity and flexibility to enter the delivery of that work. And this is super important if we're going to encourage and enable ongoing contributions from mature career workers, and if we're going to attract younger millennial generations who are prioritising a whole new set of criteria at work. Second, from a productivity perspective, when we shift the conversation, productivity gets an overhaul. By definition, our mature career and our gig career talent, they're experts at what they do. They should literally be the best placed person to work out how and what will be the most productive path through a situation. And yet most talent management practices insist on over-engineering and overly constraining work, leaving the mature or gig career person having to constantly renegotiate work expectations or processes before they can deliver at optimal productivity. Now, this can be frustrating, disengaging, and ultimately discouraging for older workers remaining in the workplace. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, shifting the conversation from work to be done to contribution to be made holds significant benefits to both organisation and employee well-being. Open any textbook on work motivation, job satisfaction, employee engagement, you will find the concept of meaningful work. When people are engaged in activities that hold meaning, that connect or contribute to something beyond the task themselves, they are healthier, they are happier, and they are higher performing. It's win-win-win with zero downside. So in summary, to optimise workforce participation, productivity and wellness, we need to shift talent and career management conversations from a focus on what people are doing at work to a focus on what contributions people are making at work. And I'll leave you with a simple 3-step formula for how to do that. Step 1, clarify purpose. Help people make sense of the overall purpose of the work and what's trying to be achieved, not just their KPIs. Step 2, set a direction. List the problems and opportunities inherent in the job or likely to be faced or needing to be addressed, not just the task list. And step 3, invite contributions. Ask older workers and gig experts 2 questions. How could or do you want to contribute to what we're doing here? And what would you need from us in order to do so? Let us know. Let them guide and contribute to the conversation. I invite you all to consider how you might shift the conversation in your businesses toward contribution, and I look forward to the other panelist contributions and the questions. Thank you, Adam. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly Windle. That was fascinating and a real potential shift of how we are thinking about our workforces, our contribution, purpose, direction, and inviting contribution. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Over to you, Kate Roffey, CEO of Melbourne Sports Centre.
Hi, thanks, Adam. And I'm going to come at this from a completely different perspective, and particularly with conversation around the hybrid workforce. I go to what I call a lot of the heads of sheds meetings around town, which are the CEOs of the sort of knowledge economy businesses, and everyone talks about the flexibility that people can have, in particular working from home and being able to spend a large part of your time at home and then go into the office as and when you sort of feel like it. We're still a bit in this post-COVID space at the moment. A bit of choose your own adventure, I like to call it. And in fact, when we're trying to employ people into roles, one of the first things they ask is there flexibility, i.e. can I work from home for a couple of days a week? I come from the current role that I'm in as the CEO of Melbourne Sports Centres, and a previous role where I was doing some contract work out in one of Australia's biggest local government entities. The hybrid workforce is actually a workforce where we have a selection of people who can choose to work from home and choose flexible arrangements, and I have a selection of people who can't because they work in those forward-facing roles where you have to be hands-on and on deck. Interestingly, I have an incredible mix of intergenerational talent in those areas, in both those areas. So I'd like us to think a little bit more about the fact that, as Kelly just said, it's a little bit more about what you're doing, not necessarily how you do it, that has to be taken into consideration in the workplace when we're talking about hybrid workplaces, and how do we cater for those who don't actually have a choice in flexibility. Usually the people who are not as senior, often in terms of structural management roles. So they're the person that has to be there to open the doors at 9 a.m, close the doors at 5 p.m. They're our swim instructors, they're our pool supervisors. They are the people who are maintaining our parks and gardens. They have to be hands-on. They love that. That's their job. But when I was at local government, one of the most fascinating things that I found when we first entered into the COVID space was that we lost touch with a third of our workforce. And we're sitting there going, what's happened? Why aren't these people responding? Why aren't they engaging? It took about 10 working days to realise these people don't actually have emails. They don't have any connection to the organisation because they have no requirement to have an online presence at all in our organisation. And that really started to change my thinking in terms of these people being incredibly important contributors to everything that is being done. In fact, there's no point me opening the centres to this, opening the doors to this wonderful pool facility behind me if I don't have lifeguards on deck. In fact, I can't open the doors. They're the most important there, and they're the ones that are getting left behind, I think, in the hybrid conversation. So I would really love it when we talk about not just intergenerational conversation, but what actually is a hybrid workplace, to consider the fact that there are a lot of people who can't actually choose flexibility or choose it to be in a different way, choose flexibility. And this is something that Sean said. My younger sister chooses to work from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. She doesn't get any overtime for starting what we would consider early, but she would prefer to have that time off in the afternoon rather than work a more standard 9 to 5 that we're used to. And I'll just leave you with one thought. Someone, when I was working in transport and infrastructure, people would always ask me, how do we always get school holiday traffic? This was pre-COVID. And I very simply said, you move the span of business hours away from the same time as school hours. What happened in COVID? We did exactly that. What happens with flexible working now? People are saying, I won't travel. I personally won't travel to go to a meeting at 9 a.m. I tell my EA, put it at 7:30, put it at 9:30, don't put it at 9 because I won't travel in peak hour traffic. There's great opportunity out of the post-COVID mindset, I think, but we have to think a little bit differently about how our workforce is made up and what hybridity actually really means.
Fantastic, Kate. Thank you so much for great illustrations of how these things are playing out. And just to make that point, as I think we'd all be thinking, those that don't have that choice around hybrid really need to be part of the conversation, as you've so eloquently put. So thank you finally, to David Colliver. Over to you, David.
Great. Thank you, Adam, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you. So my perspective is coming to you as a senior executive, transitioning to what I'm calling a portfolio career in managing a number of gig executive roles or interim contract executive roles, mixed with a balance of board roles. And that's building on my senior executive career and board career across the commercial world in large international corporates, and of late working through government and the education and health sectors. That's a bit about me. I guess what inspires me to progress this next phase of my career is the flexibility, the ability to work across different sectors at a senior role to make a difference, working with CEOs, their leadership teams and boards. Having been in that position, seeing it from both perspectives, from an executive perspective as well as a board perspective, working with teams, and I guess my proposition is how can I help people and organisations get to a different level, and that can be across a number of different things. Principally, an interim role, quite specifically, is about providing solutions to a number of different very specific outcomes. It can be of a technical nature. So having been a CFO, they need my qualifications for a particular requirement, or it might be leading some transformation agenda, having led that previously in developing transformation strategies and implementation approaches, and how do you develop that roadmap to get to A through B, or it may be as simple as holding the fort for a few months whilst the CEO or board look for the next incumbent. I guess what underpins all of that also is that the interim role is very much about specific outcomes, and so the approach is you've got a set of skills and qualifications you bring to the table. You've also got an approach where it's a can-do approach, and it's also about, of course, the people, and you're also dealing with the CEO and often a leadership team where they may or may not want to hear your advice in an open, candid and transparent manner. So you have to sort of test the waters as to how that transpires. I guess from my experience, picking up on some of Kate's observations, I think the hybrid model, the hybrid workforce, and I've seen this having just recently worked as an interim CFO with a major Melbourne-based public hospital. The necessity to be, as a senior executive, to be at the workforce was just part of it's essential. You have to be at the workforce. There's some flexibility built into that, but the CEO required me to be on site, and that was the case for all of the employees in that organisation, of course, as essential workers. Similarly, coming out of education as a COO, Chief Operating Officer, working pre and during and post-COVID, the shift to on-site to working off-site was very much, again, fitting in with government directions. But again, picking up on Kate's comments, which I think are very, very pragmatic and real insights. Surprisingly, a lot of academics and many of the teaching and their support staff aren't big users of technology, and so you have to, through that COVID period, in terms of building a flexible workforce to keep the education model operating and to support the students. There was a huge investment in technology solutions, as well as training in how to use email. Very simple things like that in terms of providing and supporting students. So I don't think it's, I guess in summary, it's not a one size fits all. There are some industries, organisations where they need to operate and have their leadership team and staff physically present. And that's at different levels, of course, where you can potentially build some of that flexibility. I guess the other thing in any sort of, because we are dealing with change, doing things differently, I guess principally having led major transformation and change strategies, it always requires very, very, very strong leadership. Communication from the start, from the get-go, and consistency at all levels. Engagement from woe to go is just essential, and that needs to come from leaders. If that's not there, the change won't occur and won't be successful. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much, David. Again, some really insightful and as you said, grounded in what you've seen as an interim gig executive over the last 10 years and also your corporate career. So greatly appreciated. All right, so we've come to the end of those opening remarks by our four panelists, and I have to say I've learned a huge amount already from that conversation, and I hope you have joining us today. We're going to kick off the Q&A now. I've got lots of great questions that are coming through, so I'm just curating them as we go. But I'll start with something that has definitely come through the questions as well, and that's we're really changing the way society thinks about work. And I'm going to throw this one to you, Dr. Gallagher. In your role at the centre of the new workforce, what trends are you seeing globally to address those skills shortages, and in particular for older workers?
Thanks, Adam, and thanks very much for the question. My line on this is that hybrid hasn't changed our jobs, but it changes how we do them. And I certainly take into account what Kelly was saying in terms of focusing on outcomes and as opposed to inputs and so forth. But it's actually changed the mechanics of work on many levels, and we sort of see two different skill sets that is essential to helping both leaders succeed as well as the individual, and we split them up into two ways. First of all, we look at very simply the impact of it's not just virtual technologies, but the enforced isolation of the pandemic. And that has changed how we communicate, how we connect, and how we collaborate with our fellow workers. And it's really about going back to basics, because we have our ability to communicate at the moment is not very competent. You see in our data, as well as working with a number of our partners in industry, work has become less efficient. And that's because there's been a proliferation of Zoom meetings, et cetera, and workers are having to work outside their standard hours just to get their day's work done. We need to go back to basics. So communication needs to be fixed. Collaboration also has to be fixed up. The proliferation of collaboration tools, we think that we're collaborating, but we're not really. We're just sharing information or coordinating actions. It's actually not very meaningful. And as such, we don't actually think about a meaningful collaboration, hard decisions, dealing with a crisis, those complex problem solvings. We don't actually have enough time to focus on those really critical things that requires, humans and what we bring to work. And of course, connection. We've lost connections across the organization. The second set of skills is about empowering people, and how to, the role of leader is no longer about, driving the traditional KPIs that you would expect. When a manager goes to, MBA school, they learn about finance and strategy and marketing. There was nowhere in there that they had to worry about pastoral care and facilitating and influencing and coaching. But in virtual spaces, which is a lot of our work, that is becoming essential. So how do leaders not only be able to deliver the expectations on their role, but also help empower people? But empowering also goes to the individual. How do we help them self-empower themselves in work? And that's about looking after their well-being. How do they project manage themselves and their time? How do they become independent? They're all critical. So the two skill sets, if I can put it that way, that we see emerging is how you work in hybrid and then how you empower people.
Thank you, Sean. Some great tips, I think, how we can take this conversation into reality when we're looking at making hybrid work. A question for you, Kelly, if I may. The new hybrid model has challenged employers and workers in terms of lifting productivity, changing the way we work. Are you aware of examples of employers that are positively addressing this issue? And can you talk us through perhaps some of the things that you've seen work?
Sure. And it's a good question. We focus a lot on the challenges, but the flip side of that is the huge opportunities. And there are businesses and there are leaders out there that are absolutely grabbing onto that. From a psychological perspective, what's happened in the last couple of years is the contract or the expectation of exchange between employer and employee. Essentially, it got broken through the pandemic. Everything went up in the air. Everything that we had agreed between employer and employer was, this is how we work, this is what's expected, that social contract. It got messed up. The terms changed. So the employers that have adapted really well to that are the ones who've been on the forefoot, very overtly going, right, this has changed. Here is the new expectation. Here are the new terms of our contract working together. Is that cool? Are you still signed up with us? What else do you need in there? The ones that aren't doing as well have just kept ploughing along. They're holding on to the old expectations, waiting for us to return to those terms of the social contract. And it's problematic because a lot of our workers are moving on. They're going, no, those terms aren't acceptable to me anymore. I know we can have other terms. And that's what I'm prioritising. That's what's now important to me. So the simplest answer to your question is where I see this done really well. I'm working with a tech firm at the moment who have done this beautifully. They have the advantage of being a digital native company and with a very young, heavy generation culture and company. So they did have the advantage of they didn't need to do a lot of the retraining in terms of how you pick up their technology that's enabled. So I grant that was advantageous. But even within that, they still needed to, and they did very early on, say to people, okay, things have changed. So what's shifting for you? What's important for us to give you? Here's what's important for you to give us under this new world. And that's shifting, and we're going to revisit that conversation very explicitly every quarter until we're comfortable that, it's settling in. They're still going quarter by quarter. It's still changing that fast. Some of the data that we just heard before from Sean, it's different 6 months ago, people's expectations and wants to have flexible arrangements than it is now. 6 months, and we haven't had a lockdown in that period. So yes, this social contracting that occurs between employee and employer, and doing that in a social way where people are interactive and contributing to that conversation, offering terms, accepting terms, how about this, how about that, this could work, this couldn't, knowing that we will then come back and reset or recontract that to make sure it's working. They're the businesses that are navigating this beautifully. The ones that are ignoring that contract's been fundamentally broken and may be fundamentally flawed going forward, they're struggling. I hope that makes sense, Adam.
It does, Kelly, thank you. And what I took from that was really to embrace some of the change, not necessarily agree with all of it, but ensure that you are having the conversation within the organisation and addressing for your culture and the work that you do. So thank you very much. Kate, I've got one here for you. You touched on this, and the question is, how can organisations with employees on site and on the front line, as well as in office roles, balance the positive opportunities that hybrid working can deliver with that type of workforce mix?
Yeah, this is something we're really struggling with a lot at the moment in a what is for me 4 hybrid workplaces. I have 4 centres, and it's a really difficult one. Part of the cultural shift is there is without doubt, I think, as employers out there, there's an element, and Kelly just touched on it, of I will restructure the contract as I want it, which means I will have Mondays and Fridays working from home. And as I continue to say to my staff, not everyone in our organisation, our one organisation, has that same option because they don't have a choice to work from home. And they're starting to actually understand that they're part of a team. And in order to be part of a team, that I shouldn't actually have what's considered to be a significantly unfair advantage over some of the others. And it really has for us been a cultural understanding piece, which my organisation had been quite separated into those who actually did the hands-on front of house stuff and those who were behind the house. And I've actually gone through the process of saying, no, you're one team and you work together. And actually those who are, let's call it, I say, in front of the house, behind the house, and our maintenance crew under the house doing the important stuff, those who are under or behind the house, your job is to actually make sure that the lifeguard can actually be in there lifeguarding a pool, because that's what our customers to do. They're actually here to swim. So it's been a process of actually flipping on the head the concept of what's the most important thing, which is certainly not me as the CEO. The centres can open without me. It's actually the people who are serving the coffees. It's the people who are teaching swim schools. It's the people who are teaching spin. That's why we're here. That's why we're working. And if we're actually cognizant of the fact that our job is to help them, then our job is to actually share some of that lack of opportunity that they might have actually to take on flexible working hours. The other thing is to make our workplaces more conducive for people to come back. We all learned how to work at home, and that wasn't the most pleasant experience, particularly if you're a Melbourneian and locked down for, nearly 2 years. So people want to come back in, but we need volume of people, for example, back in our cities. I'm involved in the AFL, and they keep saying, why don't people go to games on Friday nights? They're not in their office. If they're not in their office, they're not staying after work. Kelly and I might say, let's have a drink and dinner and then we'll go to the football. It's a trip in, and they go, that's just too hard. So somehow we've got to actually make it conducive and appealing for people to come back into the workplace who have options, so that they're there with the people who don't actually have the option to work from home, and we all get an understanding that we're sharing the same cultural experience and that we're all contributing to the betterment of our organisation. We're all here to do exactly the same thing, which is serve the customers who come through our doors.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate, very much. I know Sean would like to add some comments to that as well. Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And Kate, it's an invidious challenge facing many organizations in some respects. Elon Musk was in the headlines recently because he didn't want to create a flexible divide between those that had privileges in head office and those on the factory floor. And I think that it's important to recognize that in this war for talent in the tight labour market, that workers in head office, if they're not given flexible working, they're going to look for a job that offers it elsewhere. The challenge is, what does that mean for those that actually have to turn up and are attached to an asset, whether it be at a swimming pool, a bus, or in a nursing home? And our data was really, I think to me, it's only raised my eyebrows that of those workers who have to turn up on site, 2 in 5 of them wanted flexibility around location. Now, I think that signals that they may have to turn up and work in a factory floor for their job, but what they might be signaling is, hey, I've got skills. It's a tight labor market. I might actually look elsewhere for a job. So I think the way that organizations that have these two cohorts of workers, and to ensure that there isn't a have and have nots, is to engage in a conversation with those workers, those on-site workers. Is yes, you might have to be at a swimming pool to do your job, but how can we reduce the pain points in your job? How can we maybe help you figure out different ways of sharing your job with other people, or compressing time, or whatever it might be? I think the key thing is to drive the conversation, remembering that it's not flexible working that they're after, it's better well-being and work-life balance. That's the outcome that they're really seeking. So how can we help change your job in a way that is going to deliver those benefits? And it may include some flexibility of some form.
Thank you, Sean. Great comments as well. David, this is for you. One of the people who's joined us today has asked, how has a different approach to how you participate in work changed other aspects of your life? Would you care to comment?
It's a good question. It hasn't really, to be frank. I guess because I've always had flexibility. I've had to be flexible in my roles throughout my career, whether that's traveling overseas, which I had to do quite a lot in a number of roles, where I had teams throughout Asia or New Zealand or even within Australia, and managing, in that instance, a young family where my wife was also working as a senior executive. So I guess I've always been busy. I've always had to have flexibility, and good support in the teams in the workplace, but also that also had to align with how things were being managed at home, and I guess it's about it's about the conversation and communication, ensuring the lines are always open, and so you can plan as best you can, plan ahead. So in terms of that context, where I am now, it's no different. And so I like that flexibility. I like to be busy, and I like to be challenged. Who I am in a professional sense and in a personal sense, I'm the same person. So with it, that can be good and bad, depending where you're coming from. But yes, for me personally, it's not such a big change. I guess the only other thing I'd say just very quickly is in managing a portfolio career with a number of different opportunities, roles that are part of that portfolio, it's always planning ahead. So the interim roles, if they're 3 and 6 months, it's a bit like consulting. You've got to plan ahead for what the next gig is. So that takes a bit of extra effort, and also searching for that next opportunity. So that takes a lot of work and a lot of planning, and of course engagement, conversation with your networks. Very, very important, and very trusted networks.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. This is a question for all of the panel, and it's come in following the Jobs and Skills Summit. What key areas are you hoping that the federal government focus on to grow participation of older workers? So I might throw to you, Kelly, to kick us off.
That's a great question. And it's very exciting to see that dialogue happening in such detail at our governmental level. I think there's a lot that businesses have been doing in the last couple of years, and indeed the last couple of decades, to support the advent of intergenerational workforces like we've never seen before, and to get ready for that. I don't think it's enough for businesses to be doing that alone. We have to start connecting that up into a broader industry level, and then geographic level, and country level conversation. So I'm very excited to see the dialogue continue. I'm particularly excited to see where some of the conclusions arrive around flexibility, not just in where people are working and how people are working, but the rights of workers to claim this is how they want to be working. We still have a lot of barriers for minority groups. We still have a lot of barriers for females, from people at different stages of career, that our systems, our fundamental business systems, they have bias inherent in them that is geared to the past and that is geared to majority talent groups. Shifting that and seeing some of the ideas and the dialogue coming out of last week's conversations is really exciting, because it's really starting to call that out very explicitly for the first time and move us to some solutions that actually go, okay, so what does it look like if we engineer that bias out and make sure that we are setting up to support these new needs of various talent groups coming through, older workers being only one group of that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Kelly. Kate, your comments?
Yeah, look, this is a really interesting one, because remember, it wasn't so long ago when the unemployment rate was really high and we tried to get rid of all of our older workers out of the workforce so that our young people had jobs. So I think we've created a gap for ourselves here, in terms of a lot of people said, oh, okay, well, I'll go early and I'll retire early, and they're out of the workforce. Now we're trying to work out how we get people back. I think there's a couple of things, and David touched on it. Again, going back to being executives or people who could gig or do various things. Someone said to me recently, they said, you've spent 20 years learning how to efficiently and effectively do a good job in 30 minutes. You now get paid by the years of experience, not the minutes that you work. Now, we all, I think, can contribute back into the workforce, because with age comes wisdom and knowledge, and if you use it properly, hopefully you can contribute back in special ways. Unfortunately, the gap areas that we have are the hands-on gap areas. They're the childcare workers, they're nurses, they're people who have to come through a skilled sector. And I could tell you this, my mother, she went back as a mature age student and did her nursing qualification, and then you just get too old to work in that area physically, because she said it's just too demanding on me now. So I think we've got a real issue. I'm not too sure that we have a problem in the gig and the knowledge style sector, because I can continue working for another 20 years, contributing, hopefully. I think the gap areas and the skill shortages of we've got at trades and technical people, and one, we have to upskill them, but two, we actually have to train our young people into those places and spaces, because we can use certainly mature age people to upskill them and to educate them. But I think this gap area is the young people that are coming through. And with so many choices, we've all spoken about the fact it's very much an employee's market out there at the moment, because unemployment is so low. Where are they going? All of my hands-on front of house jobs are usually the lower paid ones in an organisation as well. And I'm a deputy chancellor at a university. We're finding that people are actually stopping halfway through their academic qualification, whether it's a business degree or something, because they're going, I work in hospitality, and my hospitality management company are fast-tracking me through the management process. I don't even need to continue to study anymore, because they are going to promote me up through the system into much higher paying roles and management roles without needing a qualification anymore. And we're on this crazy fast-track system because of post-COVID, I think, environment. It really has changed the way, and I'm not sure that we've even contemplated how we catch up yet, much less the areas that we specifically need to catch up on. So hang on to your hats, people. There's going to be a skills shortage and a gap area coming for 4 or 5 years, I think.
Yeah, that war on talent is not going anywhere. Finally, just because of time, Sean, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I would like to actually pick up on what Kate was saying. And I think that, yes, people need jobs, and yes, you need skills to do them. I'm a little bit worried that we're a bit obsessed and hyper-focused on skills, in the sense that, all of a sudden work can be reduced into task. My fear is that employees will be seen just as workers and not as humans, right? We lost last week the Queen. And if you listen to all of the world leaders that had a long relationship with her, they'll say she was wise, she was thoughtful, she was curious, she had experience, and she supported them. And, yes, she had tasks to do every day. You could easily put someone else into that job to do those tasks. It was the human that had the wealth of experience that is what we're celebrating in terms of her life. The challenge is, how do we value that in work? How do it's, not rather than just, hours, in terms of, doing a shift, but maybe picking up on what Kelly was saying is, how do we measure the outcomes, the value that our older generation workers can contribute that isn't measured by simply checking in at a certain time and checking out another time and doing certain tasks and, producing a number of widgets? How do we do that as a society?
Thank you, Sean. Look, we've run out of time a little bit. So a big thank you to all of our panelists, David Colliver, Kelly Windle, Kate Roffey and Sean Gallagher. A fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just closing from me, I think in essence, hybrid could be a catalyst for a more exclusive economy, as we've discussed, or a more inclusive one. I think right now it's up to us to make that decision through policy and through the way we do things in our organisations. I think I've seen firsthand how it can allow older Australians to stay more engaged for longer. I've experienced younger generations employed as digital nomads, putting the value of tech literacy to work in ways that are previously inconceivable. I've known women who finally feel able to compete in a working world that doesn't require 9 to 5, as we've discussed, or regular travel, 24/7 attention spans. I think importantly that the flow of skilled workers moving through an organisation on a less permanent and hierarchical basis can empower a culture of workplace diversity and inclusion for the greater good as well. Hybrid work, I don't think, is an option, unfortunately, afforded to everyone, but my hope is that we can make the decision as a business and wider community to leverage these new hybrid norms as a way to welcome greater workforce participation and unlock the skills of this intergenerational Australia that we're talking about today. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back to Clint.
Thanks very much, Adam, and thank you to all of our speakers for preparing for and participating in today's discussion and sharing your knowledge and insights with us. I'd also like to thank Adam particularly for making himself available, for herding those cats and leading a really great discussion today, and also being the sponsor of today's forum. It's been a pleasure to work with you. It won't come as a surprise to any of our members who are tuned in to know that these are topics that we will continue to interrogate throughout the course of our work in the coming months ahead, both in our regular labour market updates, which we do every 6 months, and also in forward dedicated forums. Please do take a minute to rate your live stream event experience on Pigeonhole if you'd like to do that before you leave, and keep an eye out for the post-event email, which will get across to you in the next week with a recording and a link to today's live stream and some further details on that. If you'd like to stay in touch with any of CEDA's upcoming work and content related to today's discussion, including about to be announced an address in Melbourne from the Federal Skills and Training Minister, the Honourable Brendan O'Connor, stay tuned and keep updated on www.ceda.com.au. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for joining in today and for participating in the discussion, putting forward your questions and supporting the work of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. Have a good afternoon and go well.